Hello, hello, hello. My name is Nate Rasa, and welcome back to I Just Can't Even With Myself Right Now, my personal pet project podcast where I discuss absolutely anything that comes to mind, because limits are for losers, and in my space, we follow the wind. So sit back, tense up, and enjoy NE Unleashed. And as always, live it up, folks, and make it happen. Hey guys, what's up? I know it's actually been a while, and I don't know, and I feel like it's been a while because time moves differently during online. And I say that because judging from my last upload, it was probably just about roughly a few days, I think, since I last posted anything. I also kind of took like a brief kind of social media break, just to kind of recollect myself. It's a typical thing when you lack NI enough to view the future in a way that is very clear to you, which, by the way, is my smooth transition into the topic of today's episode, which is introverted intuition. And I figured I'd talk about introverted intuition because I guess I haven't really fully shared my opinion on NI, and also at the suggestion of a friend of mine who would really want to know what NI is, or at least from my understanding of what NI is, and what NI is from my interactions with fellow NI users. So this is for the people who are the NFJs and the SPs of the house. Oh, not just NFJs, the NTJs as well, sorry. The NJs and the SPs of the house. There we go. So it's funny because it's like I'm kind of wrapping my head around it because there's so many things I can talk about NI, but as an NE user, it's like, where do you start? What do you do? So I'm just going to jump in. I like to define NI mostly from jumping off of the socionic description, because I feel like that, to me, the definition of NI from that system, to me, makes a little bit more sense, or at least is a little bit more comprehensive. And doesn't make it look like it's the all-knowing function. Because I know with those who kind of explore MBTI for the first time, or if you're totally getting yourself into it, NI is described as being like the prophet, like who can see the future and can tell what's going to happen next and has all this like magical properties, which doesn't make sense to me. I really don't understand that. And like the people who identify or relate to NI, especially the ones who probably aren't really NI users, will often kind of overdo it. They'll always be like, well, I'm an NI user, therefore I just know, which also doesn't make a lot of sense because that's not how NI works either. And when you actually meet folks, let's say like myself, who have actually interacted and met NI users, you will definitely you can tell there is a definite difference about them, but there is something about them that is both interesting, that is both very fascinating, and isn't at all what's being described or what these other folks that you may hear kind of like to promote NI to be as, when it's not. NI in socionics has been described as the intuition of time. And from what I understand, the intuition of time is being acutely aware of one's place in time. A lot of NI users like to talk about how they really don't relate to time in a sense. It's almost as if they view time as static, or almost to the point where it's non-existent. They kind of see everything in life as having its place, but they don't see it as a line. They see it like a cycle, that it comes up. There are ups and there are downs. So for every situation, there will always be its opposite will be true as well. Unlike NE, which the direction of being able to simultaneously hold multiple perspectives as both true, it's not the same with NI. It's kind of like the belief that everything will always return back full circle. And it's kind of grown to me that I have this kind of personal theory, which I hope other folks will probably call me out on it, because at the moment, this theory of mine kind of holds, at least, or at least it gives me comfort understanding NI users. that I call them as the type of people who kind of embody cyclical thinking. So they're the type of folks who will talk to you about how things will naturally kind of go run its course. They are very in tune with how society will, like, especially on a macro level, they're in tune with how society will kind of have a point where they'll reach a goal and then they'll start something else. But everything is just interconnected and everything will just come back full circle. So the best way I could kind of compare it to in that context is very much like any kind of cycle that we have on the planet. Like for example, the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle. We have all these things where everything is just constantly repeating. Sure, some variables might change, but the overall kind of result or big picture kind of remains the same. And this kind of brings me to my next kind of metaphor about NI, is that introverted intuition, when I compare it to extroverted intuition, my NE can see the sea in front of me. I see the sea on my left, I see the sea on my right, I see the sea beside me, and I look down and I also see more sea, right? With NI, they don't see a sea necessarily. They see, or they observe, the entire ocean. So it kind of, how I use this metaphor to explain the kind of the priority and the preference that the viewing of intuition is for the two intuition kind of functions. While NE swims in the chaos, almost quite literally, NI doesn't. NI kind of likes to step back and will always prioritize viewing everything from a single point, or leading everything to a single point, while NE is divergent in nature, NI is convergent in nature. But what's even more interesting, as I kept kind of learning about NI, was that the functions, I became less and less of opposites of each other, and more as just two distinct ways of viewing intuition. And I say that because at least for me, the truth about NE is that the opposite of NE is SI, and the opposite of NI is SE. And by fully understanding that kind of thinking is fundamental in kind of understanding how the two axes kind of interacts with each other and how they perceive the world very differently, or how even they gather information differently. Because like with NI users, when I talk to them, and I had a wonderful conversation with an INTJ with dominant NI, and me being dominant NE, and I was just curious. I was like, let's say we're both talking about a scenario of us sitting in front of our computers. Like, what is the situation that kind of goes on in our heads? I explained to her from my perspective. I imagine everything either going wrong, going well, going all over the place. And an example is I can stare at any object that my eyes land on, and I will just start to dream like possibilities, potentials of what this object could be. So it could be the monitor, the microphone, the headphones, the little Kraken rum bottle I have in front of me, like a highlighter, like a circle drawer. Like, I'm thinking of these things could do this, they can think that they could fall, they can do everything, they make all these things happening. I live in a chaotic kind of imagery that I am projecting onto the world, but that's my comfort in a sense. And so the NI user, like this INTJ, kind of similar. She sees all of these possible chaos, but she's honing in on the ones that are giving her the most realistic kind of take. So for example, if she saw like a glass of water in the corner of her table, if it's at the corner, she'll start fixating on it and it'll start to fall, or it'll begin to fall. She's probably imagined it already having fallen. And if she doesn't affect it in any way, then the object will indeed be, will follow its course and will fall in. And it's something that's really fascinating to me because I, as an end user, I don't see it that way. Sure, I see the glass, but I am distracted by what's beside the glass, what else is around the glass. So I don't always kind of pick at the likelihood of it falling unless I have, the SI kind of understanding that reality requires a tether on my case. But for them, change is required by purposely forcing their body, their selves, to affect reality or else they just disappear into the realm of the intangible. Now, I guess I'm getting a little very abstract here, which is, I think, kind of like the realm of intuition anyway. So, how I see NI with SE as their axis. It's an SE I discussed in the previous episode about just kind of exacting force upon objects. With NI and SE kind of in combination, the two of them work hand in hand, especially when it comes to like observing objects for what it is. In a sense, I would say NI and SE folks are more likely to kind of just see things at its raw point. There really isn't any kind of potential there is, or even if there was, like how with SE is, they kind of seek out the very practical use of that item or object. And then NI is just going to hone in, prioritizing the bigger picture. So they're honing in on what the point of the object is to begin with. Like, what is it? Like, what am I going to do with it? What's the whole point of this? Can we do something about it? So it's what makes NI incredibly powerful and useful, because it comes to a point where they are able to perceive things that are kind of obvious in their eyes, and obvious in the sense that they prioritize or are so focused on how something might likely be based on the objects in question, the object's place in time, right? Because everything to them is an eventuality, not a possibility. And something about that is very kind of important for, I guess, the NE-SI axis to kind of understand when conversing to NI and SE people, because they do not really react to comforts and possibilities like we do, albeit we may have similar takes, because in NE and NI, they're both intuition. My accuracy is developed via the more I take in, like the more explorative I get, so that my comforts can be maximized, right? But in their case, it's a little bit different. The goal can only be actualized or manifested if the SE in them is developed enough to push them in that direction. The world will continually leave them behind unless they themselves move. So it's very, very different, like perceptions of the world. That's why I would say SE folks like to talk about opportunities a lot, like opportunities not having to miss out on things. They talk about how we can't let a moment pass you by. And then you have NI people complaining about how sometimes they have a thought, they would spend, hours dreaming up on what they need to say, only to realize that the moment has passed them by. Because with low tier SE or SE in the tertiary or in the inferior stack, it's difficult for them to manifest the action required to enact the goals that they have. Albeit, it's funny because there's seems to be kind of an overflow of praise for folks like the INTJs and the ENTJs, even though reality dictates that these types they all have their fair share of kind of issues as well. Taking in the ENTJs, who are constantly overpraised in the type community, when you realize that their stacking kind of makes them interesting and human at the same time. In socionics, there is a description where they're called polar SI, meaning that they have they don't really have any kind of idea what comfort is. They have a difficulty enacting that or understanding that. So they'll go through days or weeks where they probably don't really take care of their health, but at the same time they kind of make up for it with tertiary SE, so that they overdo their force on others and on things. So I know an ENTJ who would start working out at 3 a.m. because why not, right? Who cares about sleep? Or she'll completely skip sleep, or she'll only eat when she's really, really hungry, or she'll only go to the bathroom when she really, really needs to go. Who cares about taking care of your body first? What body? Who lives in their body? They certainly don't. And they share this mentality with ENFJs, who kind of forget that they have a body, if that makes sense. all you NI users listening, you guys have to let me know if what I'm saying is making sense, because from an NESI person, let's just myself, I can't help but kind of like look at you guys sometimes and be a little like, okay, y'all are weird, you know? And which kind of drives them in a sense, because NI folks are by definition, by existence, weird people, because they function completely out of the ordinary. There is an out of the ordinary kind of way, with how everything they do, and even if they're clumsy, even if they're not, even if they're, you know, entrepreneurial and visionary and all that good stuff, there's still an aspect about them where they really do believe that they're aliens. And not in a sense that, not like an Enneagram type 4 alien feelings, which is a whole different topic on its own. When you're an NI user, you really feel like you kind of don't belong. Even physically, you don't belong. Like there is this, and the thing is what it is always choosing to see the ocean kind of puts you in a position where you are alone. Kind of puts you in a position where you aren't going to be on the same level as everybody else. And viewing the world as cyclical is not common either. You know, you don't see a lot of people who argue the importance of what comes up will always come down, and vice versa. To everybody else, it's kind of like linear. You know, everybody kind of has the spontaneous dynamics of moving forward, but nobody, you know, and like learning from your past, but nobody really kind of just actually thinks about that. You know, like they don't really actually do anything about it. So, you know, and there isn't like tried and true methods either that works for NI users, because it also doesn't make sense. Because with SE and their tactile ability to kind of handle things on the fly, and then NI where they focus on the goal, it's just kind of, it doesn't really fit the realm of kind of structure, because it's almost like anti-structure in a sense. And I can see why a lot of NJs and SPs would probably struggle with structure, that they're not kind of into it. Or either they're not into it, or they have like a lack of respect for it. They think of it as kind of holding them back in a sense. And it's funny because like I talk about this at length, and it's funny because I'm talking about it as I'm feeling that I don't fully understand them just yet. My personal kind of take on NI is that I personally don't really get along with NI DOMs, and I'm gonna like throw that down right there. It's just a handful of NI DOMs that I have actually gotten along with, and the reason why I say that is because just the difference in perception is very clear. You know, my NE is extremely loud, and it's not just the fact that I am a loud person, it's also because of how strong my NE is based off of kind of my experiences in my life, right? And their NI, at least the ones I had like an abrasion with, the NI can be so strong that we clash, and we kind of insist that one or the other is better, which is obviously my mistake, because, you know, it's not a competition, but it's also kind of fun to kind of push and pull with this. On the days that I met, like, and I didn't have an abrasion with NI users, or NI DOM specifically, it's one of the most rewarding experiences or conversations I've ever had. And I remember like a friend of mine who's, I believe, an STP, would find high tier NI folks kind of arrogant. Like, I don't get turned off when it's a good conversation, because the NI is like a black hole, and my NE's explosion is just being deliciously kind of falling into place. And I remember there was like this tweet thread, you know, that talked about how NI users secretly enjoy talking to NE users, because NE users provide them the fodder that they need to kind of sift through the chaos and find what they need to find. And then I replied by saying that NE users such as myself secretly like talking to NI users, because with all the BS about my NE just causing me to just kind of blind what I really need to see, you know, blinding me from what the NI truth is that I should probably be kind of learning from. NI users help me with that. I know with INFJs, And by, just to a degree also, ENFJs will always be able to ask me the right questions to get me to like stop and think, which is not easy. As a 7 who's constantly moving, as an ENFP, it's just, there's a lot of factors in my personality makeup that make it very difficult to ponder and sit down and meditate. Like, these things are very difficult for me. When you talk to an NFJ, at least in my experience, the result always ends up to some kind of deep conversation where I get to unearth some kind of wisdom that I never knew I had, that can only be harnessed via them. Now, to all you comic, nerds out there, I'm gonna make a reference. There's, in the DC comic world, there is an Indigo tribe who wield the Indigo power rings. And the Indigo power ring of compassion, they have a specific ability where they can channel abilities of other folks. Actually, no, I'm actually thinking that wrong. It's not. Is it indigo? It's either indigo or blue, where they have the ability that only the power comes out only when in conjunction with somebody else. And I think it's very, and okay, I totally butchered that metaphor, but to anyone out there who kind of gets what I'm trying to say, is that there's a real, like, I, at least, and for me as a person, and then for me as a type, rely on NI to be able to clarify what is in front of me. Because without SE, in my valued stack, it's very hard for me to take reality for what it is. It's very hard for me to interact in reality without a tether. And NI and SE, they get a similar kind of issue, especially with NI users. They also require tether, but the direction of which they spin the thread, whereas I have to constantly tie a thread. For them, all they have to do is connect the thread, because for them it's SE. They just have to interact with the object, which by interacting it has enacted the change. For me, even interacting with the object doesn't do anything, because interacting with that object only causes more possibilities to spring. Oh gosh, I have reached high level like abstraction with this conversation, and I really hope that with the NI users listening, that you guys fully understand what I'm explaining, because I'm trying my best, trying to be able to give you guys trying to do you guys justice, because it's very hard to see and read people be confused about NI and be like, oh well, I don't know, I don't understand NI people, they're like considered so smart and so blah. And I'm like, yes, they can be, but they're also like normal people, like they're also humans. Like, if we could humanize NI in a sense, then it makes sense to really take them as a human being. I think it's because they're not as common in statistically wise, that it's hard to find like a proper comparison, and to kind of like, I guess in my TE words, like to find a data pool that you can actually trust. But keep digging, you'll eventually find them. What you may assume is arrogant may actually be just wisdom that's just inevitable to an NI user just being expressed. And that's all like kind of is really nice about them, or it's really delightful about them. I had to say this, but like, I have to say this, but I do love NI as a function. I love it as for what it's useful as. Again, like, I do have difficulties with folks who are NI users, but again, I try really hard not to paint all of them as such, because I do have a good fair share of folks who are NI DOMs, NI AUX, NI TERT, NI inferior, who are fantastic to talk to. And I've had wonderful conversations with them, and some of them, again, quick hit here. If you're going to talk to an NI user, be prepared to lose at least 4 hours of your life. Every time. Either you get good at scheduling yourself or you don't. You just have to be able to be really good at that, because they will kind of take over. I wouldn't say no, actually, it's not that they take over. It's more so that the conversation itself will take that kind of state. It has to. To an NI user, again, remember, like, the direction. They're moving up. They're always trying to see the world for what it is, for the entirety of it. So for the conversation to be of worth to them, it has to take some form of deep form, which as we as NE users are more comfortable. We can do that too, but we don't have to, because for us, we're building on. We're not, we're diverging, we're not converging. So we're creating more chaos. We're not actually sifting through it. Whereas for them, it's the opposite. So it's just kind of a give and take. But it's funny just having to watch it be played out. If you ever get the privilege of having to listen to an NI user explain their thought process, it's, for lack of a better term, really magical. But at the same time, it's also realistic because it's backed with SE. And I think we need to understand the importance of SE to an NI user for us to be able to fully grasp its worth and its realism and humanity, as why this is a part of us as humans with NI. Because by constantly comparing it to NE, I feel like people are gonna keep causing all this like miscommunication, misinterpretations, like, oh, but it's the opposite of NE and blah blah blah. And I'm like, we need to move away from that. I really think that the opposite of NI is SE, and the two kind of intertwine and they go against NESI. And those four functions kind of like flavor our information gathering, our data collecting, our learning processes, our priority when it comes to the data, all that good stuff. And so with that, I hope my fellow NI users listening fully enjoyed this. If not, please let me know and I'll do my best for next time. But at the same time, thank you everybody else for listening. I hope for the folks out there who are trying to understand what NI is, kind of get it. I hope you guys kind of understand NI in a more digestible way, because that was my goal in this episode. I want you guys to be able to get NI. I think it's a wonderful function, but it's also an understandable function. we as as typology enthusiasts kind of really need to get better at understanding our functions again, because sometimes if we forget the foundation of each thing, we kind of tend to misunderstand its application. Like, how else can we move forward and learn and add on to what we have understood if what our foundation is also incorrect or inaccurate? Which is hilarious coming from me as a polar TI, but whatever. It's that would be another episode for another topic. So with that, thank you guys for listening, and I hope you guys have a good night. Bye.